Welcome, Dr. Epic here. And what we're going to discuss in this section are volcanoes, bombers, buried cities, fantastic art, and ancient graffiti. Because we are going to the ancient Roman city of Pompeii. We're going to follow that outline right up above. So write it down and use it as a guide for your notes to follow. And let's go ahead and get started. We're not just going to learn a bunch of information about Pompeii. I'm just not going to present to you the archaeological record of this ancient city. What I'm going to do is give you a research question and then work through all of the archaeological evidence to give you the data you need to answer that question. Now, this is done because archaeology is rarely done to just expand the base of human knowledge. You don't go out there and dig for another brick in the wall of understanding. No. Archaeology as a scientific methodology always begins with a research question. Who built the pyramids? What's the relationship between society and the state at this ancient Maya city? And that's what we're going to do with Pompeii. You already have all the thought tools you need. A scientific archaeology, you formulate a hypothesis. You develop a methodology to answer the hypothesis. You apply the methodology, and then you publish your results in a timely manner. And this is what I expect for you to do to answer your research question about ancient Pompeii. Formulate multiple hypotheses, think about how you can prove, disprove, or modify these hypotheses, study the archaeological evidence I'm going to give you, and then publish the results, which is, that's the midterm. That's exactly what that is. And as we walk through the stratigraphic record of Pompeii, as we move through exactly what is at Pompeii today, you're going to use this data to get at past human behavior. And you're going to do this by studying the different depositional events that created the modern archaeological record of this ancient Roman city. Now, here is your research topic. That's the question right up above. Write this down in your notes. Keep this question circling the back of your brain as we move through the next two modules. And as you approach a point at which you're able to actually answer this question. And there's the question right up above me. It is, using the archaeological evidence and the account of Pliny the Younger, reconstruct the final days of Pompeii. What happened during each stage of the eruption? What evidence supports your reconstruction of events? What happened in the final days inside Pompeii? And specifically, what happened in the house of Polybius? I want to make an important point here. I do not want, if you choose to answer this question in the midterm, I do not want a big information dump. I want you to specifically reconstruct what happened at Pompeii and use specific pieces of archaeological evidence to support your reconstruction. First, this happened because of evidence A, B, and C. Then this happened because of evidence D and E. Then this happened because of evidence F, G, and I. That's the way to answer the question. Don't just give me back what I already know, because, I already know it. So, let's go to Pompeii itself. Pompeii is a highly unusual site. It is the oldest continually studied archaeological site in the world. And what it is an entire buried Roman city, albeit a pretty small city. And it was from the 1st century AD. It was buried over the course of a 3-day volcanic eruption. Now, there's other sites in the world that have been buried by volcanic activity or by geologic activity. There's like a big mudslide buried this Native American village in the Pacific Northwest. There's a volcano that buried a Maya village down in El Salvador. But basically, there's nothing else in the world on the scale of Pompeii. There's nothing as big as Pompeii, there's nothing as dramatic as Pompeii, and there's nothing with such amazing art like Pompeii has. And indeed, the dead of Pompeii and the manner in which Italian archaeologists have managed to preserve the last moments of the poor people killed in this eruption has in fact given Pompeii this poignant and uniquely human touch. It's not often that you actually deal with individuals in the archaeological record. Usually you're dealing with a midden that took 100 years to accumulate, and you're talking about huge trends in settlement and behavior and cultural activity over time. Very rarely do individuals actually come out of the archaeological record, but not at Pompeii. Pompeii is filled with individuals. All manner of people have been recovered from the tephra that covered this ancient city. All right, where is Pompeii? Pompeii is right there. It's roughly about 200 kilometers to the southeast of Rome on the coast. There's a more detailed map right up above me. That's the Bay of Naples. At the top, on the north side of the Bay of Naples, is the great city of, well, Naples. But in the Roman time, it was the new city. It was called Neapolis. And that huge volcano mountain-looking thing right in the middle of the map right above my yellow box, that is the volcano of Mount Vesuvius. But the important thing to remember about Mount Vesuvius is Mount Vesuvius had been dormant for centuries before it erupted in 79 AD. And to a lot of the people that lived around it, to a lot of the Romans who lived around the Bay of Naples, they didn't know that the mountain was a volcano. As a matter of fact, they didn't really even know what volcanoes were. And if you look on the south slope of Vesuvius, that dot just to the south of Vesuvius, that is Pompeii. Other sites that should be of interest here is immediately to the west of Mount Vesuvius. The city on the coast is Herculaneum. Herculaneum is going to be very important later on. And if you find Neapolis and then go west, you find this city at the mouth of the Bay of Naples. That's called Mycenium. And Mycenium was a very important Roman military base. And it is from Mycenium where we have our only account in the historical record of the eruption at Pompeii, because that's as close as we get. We actually have no written account from inside the city itself. All we have is this account of a guy called Pliny the Younger, and he wasn't actually in Pompeii at all. He was at Mycenium, where he'd gone with his uncle, who was a senator called Pliny the Elder. Both of these guys will be important later on. Okay, a little background about Pompeii, Roman Empire, 1st century AD. In AD 79, Pompeii was a number of settlements around the Bay of Naples. The largest of these was, of course, Neapolis, which is modern-day Naples itself. The Roman Navy had a big military base at Mycenium. And this period, this is in the real golden age of the Roman Empire. During the reign of the Emperor Titus, that's him right up there. Titus was one of the sons of Vespasian, and we've met Vespasian because he's the guy that pardoned Flavius Josephus. And that the 1st century AD, this is the golden age of the Roman Empire, a period of unrivaled peace, unrivaled prosperity, unrivaled accomplishment. The world had never really seen anything like the Roman Empire. So, now throughout the year of 79, the region around the Bay of Naples had felt a series of earthquakes. It had damaged a number of structures around the Bay of Naples. But on the afternoon of August 24th, Mount Vesuvius explodes. We know this because not one, but two of the great historians of the age were present. They were with the Roman Navy at Mycenium. There was Pliny the Elder, who was a senator and in fact an admiral of the Roman Navy, or the Roman equivalent of an admiral. And his nephew, that's that fellow right there, that is Pliny the Younger. Now, Pliny the Elder immediately begins a series of rescue operations around the bay, and he leaves his nephew, Pliny the Younger, at the naval base at Mycenium. And he's got this perfect view across the bay at Mount Vesuvius, at the city of Pompeii, and at the site as it explodes. And Pliny the Elder is like dealing with rescue operations, picking people off the coast, using the Roman Navy to rescue people. But Pliny the Younger sits in his uncle's villa at Mycenium and basically watches this disaster unfold over the next 2.5 days from his perch at Mycenium. And that's the account we have of the eruption of Pompeii in the historical record. Pliny the Younger describes a 4-stage eruption, and it begins with a towering column of ash and fire, one that drifts south with the wind. It snuffs out the sun, darker and thicker than any night. Pliny's words. Ash and huge burning stones start to fall from this cloud, and he could see farms on the slopes of the mountain burning. He can see the town of Pompeii itself is on fire. He can see long lines of people with torches fleeing the city to the south. He describes them as having pillows tied on their head as these burning rocks shoot out of this cloud which has emerged from the top of the volcano. He could see the people of Herculaneum fleeing to the water. He could see the stones floating on the surface of the Bay of Naples, and parts of the bay begin to boil in the heat. People can't even swim to safety. The sea water itself boils. He describes the eruption, the first stages of the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, as looking like what he describes as an umbrella pine. Okay, so what is an umbrella pine? That tree right above my yellow box, that is an umbrella pine. And that's a copy of Pliny the Younger's letter in which he's describing the eruption at Vesuvius. And he describes it in 4 stages. Here are the first stages. Stage 1, the mountain explodes. It sends up a slender column of ash and gas, which reaches a certain height and then begins to spread out. That's the analogy to the umbrella pine. That's stage 1, the initial eruption. Stage 2, that column keeps pumping out gases and ash. It builds this layer, this huge cloud over the volcano, but that huge cloud begins to drift south. And out of that cloud begin to fall all of these burning rocks, big chunks of stone, and they begin to fall directly on top of the city of Pompeii. That's the dark cloud, darker and thicker than any night, and these burning materials falling from the sky. Stage 2 basically goes on for about 2 days, and then it finally gives way to stage 3. Stage 3 is something really dramatic happens. The mountain explodes. And I don't mean just a column of smoke shooting out of the top. The entire side of the mountain bulges and explodes outward. Pliny the Younger describes these 6 massive explosions with these huge burning clouds that gallop along the land and pour out across the ocean, killing everything in their path. That is stage 3. We're going to call that stage by its modern geologic term, a pyroclastic surge. And the mountain is just this devastated crater when it reaches stage 4. Stage 4 is actually the eruption itself has ended. The mountain is a broken, hollow shell and doesn't contain any more volcanic activity. But that huge cloud is still up in the sky, even though the volcano is no longer feeding it. And then what happens across the 3rd day is basically all of those particulates drift down in this wave, this rain of volcanic fallout. That's stage 4. So here are the stages. Stage 1, the eruption like an umbrella pine. Stage 2, that cloud moves south and begins to drop all these burning huge rocks from it, and they fall on the city of Pompeii. In fact, they fall on everything that's to the south of the mountain. Stage 3 is the mountain itself explodes in a pyroclastic surge, also called a pyroclastic flow. Stage 4 is that volcanic fallout. The mountain itself is expanded, it's a broken wreck, and all of that fine material drifts down from the sky, burying anything that was left alive. Those are the 4 stages. In fact, these stages have become known geologically as a Plinian eruption. I'm going to give you a better sense of that 3rd stage. So on the morning of the 2nd day, this is August 25th, Pliny writes of a series of these huge explosions, the mountain itself exploding open. And he describes this as a, quote unquote, a dense cloud looms behind us, following like a flood poured across the land. The cloud spreads with incredible speed. Anything that touches the cloud dies. It buries Pompeii itself. It buries Herculaneum, and it buries the city of Stabiae. And among the people that touch that cloud and die are Pliny the Elder, Pliny the Younger's uncle. He's overcome by poison-gassed dust at the town of Stabiae, which you can see right up there. In fact, he dies really ignominiously. Like, people are freaking out, and Pliny the Elder wants to like assure people that he's in control and assure people that the worst of it is over. So he decides to take a bath, and while he's in the bath, the pyroclastic surge erupts and kills him. And in fact, the reason Pliny the Younger even wrote this letter is because there was another Roman historian called Tacitus, and Tacitus says, I really want to know how my friend Pliny the Elder died. Can you tell me of his death? And that's actually why Pliny the Younger actually wrote the account of Pompeii at all. He wasn't interested in writing this for the general public. That's not how the Romans viewed history. Now, this is the big eruption in 79 AD, and this is something about volcanoes that here's a little factoid about volcanoes. The volcanoes that erupt on a regular basis, those are actually the volcanoes that are actually pretty safe, because they're letting off this pressure at regular intervals. It's the volcanoes that kind of sit dormant and just kind of smolder and just think about erupting for 1,000 years. Those are the volcanoes that erupt with massive destructive potential. And Vesuvius has regularly erupted almost every century since AD 79. Every 150 years or so, the volcano will erupt again. And this actually gives geologists a really good idea of how the volcano operates. Now, this is from a geological report around Vesuvius. And what they've done is they've sort of mapped in the tephra that dates to the time of the AD 79 eruption. Tephra, if you don't know, is what happens to volcanic ash when it lands. So volcanic ash lands, it cools, and then it hardens to this kind of crumbly concrete-like consistency. There is the photograph of the last known eruption of Vesuvius, and we'll get to the last known eruption in Vesuvius in just a tick. But you can see from the map above me and the map on the left that these are the wind patterns from the 79 AD eruption. And as you can see, modern geology has in fact largely confirmed Pliny's account. Pliny had a sharp eye and an active mind, and he accurately recorded how the volcano erupted over time. There was this eruption from the top of Vesuvius. It did form this large cloud, and from the evidence uncovered by these geologists, that cloud from the volcano began to drift south. And it was followed, as you can see there on the left, it was followed by the deposits from the pyroclastic surge. What is a pyroclastic surge? A pyroclastic surge is probably the single most dangerous geological event on the planet. It basically consists of when the central chamber of a volcano bulges and explodes out the side of the mountain. And it turns into this massive gas, this massive cloud of burning gas, of burning ash. It can reach temperatures between 400 and 1,000 degrees. It's filled with noxious fumes, poison gases. All of these are superheated. They can travel at speeds of hundreds of miles an hour. Anything that a pyroclastic surge touches dies. And you know what? I'm not going to describe a pyroclastic surge to you. I'm going to show you a pyroclastic surge. Because in the 1980s, there was a volcano at a place called Mount Unzen in Japan. And the mountain exploded in the middle of the day. And there was a National Geographic team on site to document the explosion of Mount Unzen. They did not survive the explosion. So let's watch the collapse of the volcanic dome and the pyroclastic surge. Everything that this cloud touches dies. And in fact, you're going to watch the camera right up above me, it wobbles at some point. That's the cameraman jogging the camera with his elbow as he turns to run for his life.
Something triggers a pyroclastic flow about 10 times bigger than all that came before. Within moments, it overwhelms the valley. By the time a TV camera in the village records this scene, Maurice, Katya, and 41 others are dead.
That is a pyroclastic flow. That is apparently what struck Pompeii on the second day or the beginning of the third day of the explosion. That's what Pliny the Younger describes in his letter to Tacitus. Now, Vesuvius is a really strange volcano. Every 100, 150 or so years, it will explode. It'll bury everything around the Bay of Naples in ash. And the last time it exploded, this is I mean, truth is stranger than fiction. The last time that Mount Vesuvius exploded was directly in the middle of World War II. In fact, it exploded in the middle of a massive battle between the Germans and the Americans in southern Italy. And you can't even make this stuff up. This was in fact recorded by the Americans who were there. And I mean, these things look like heavy metal albums, but these are all real photographs. That the ash that was erupting from Mount Vesuvius was actually impeding American bombers as they were trying to go and bomb the Germans and kick them out of Italy. All of these are real photographs from that World War II eruption of Mount Vesuvius. The locals said that the mountain smelled blood. The mountain smelled the blood of battle, and that's why it exploded in the middle of this huge battle between the Americans and the Germans. So yeah, they look like heavy metal album covers. But yeah, that's the last time it exploded. So that was about 80 years ago. So I mean, it's getting due. Mount Vesuvius is due another one of these eruptions. Probably not on the scale of the eruption in 79, but probably something on the scale of the eruption in the 40s. Yeah, that's a real photograph. That really happened. At any rate, one of the myths about Pompeii is that the Roman Empire made no real attempts to save the people. And this is actually not true. This was a huge disaster, and the entire empire responded to help the survivors of the eruption. I mean, the Emperor Titus himself came to Neapolis in an attempt to help with rescue efforts. Herculaneum itself was overwhelmed by its own massive pyroclastic surge. Herculaneum was buried underneath 23 meters of tephra. 23 meters. That's something like 70 feet in freedom units. Pompeii itself was buried beneath 4 to 6 meters of material. Stabiae, where Pliny the Elder died, that was buried underneath 2 to 3 meters of material. And for the most part, these communities that were wiped off the face of the earth, these communities never really recovered. The empire came in, it helped resettle some of the survivors. In fact, we know this because there's actually some tombstones that were found in northern Spain where it mentions people that had died there of old age. And on their tombstones, it mentions that they were refugees from the famous eruption at Vesuvius. So we know that the people were relocated to other parts of the empire, but these communities themselves, they were never reestablished. There was no real attempt to kind of rebuild Pompeii. There was no attempt to rebuild Herculaneum. For the most part, they just dedicated these areas to farming, to, you know, goat herding, where they'd make their really famous cheese of southern Italy. And over time, especially, you know, as we get into the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th centuries AD, as the Roman Empire itself began to die, the disaster was largely forgotten about. It was remembered only by students of antiquity that would read, you know, the letters of Pliny the Younger. It was only remembered by sort of local legends among farmers and goat herders that, you know, there's like buried cities around here. But for like the general population and for the scholarly community at large, this disaster from AD 79 was largely forgotten about. All of this changes in 1748, when these buried cities, when these sites were rediscovered by the new king of Naples, by this Neapolitan king named Charles VII. And Charles VII is an interesting character because he is actually not Italian. This was during a period of particular, you know, political upheaval in Europe, and the King of France wanted a reliable ally as the King of Southern Italy, as the King of Naples. So he appoints a member of his own family from the House of Bourbon, that was the ruling family of France, to be the King of Naples. And this is how you get Charles VII, who is a French king who rules over an Italian city, and that's Naples. But Charles VII took his position as king very, very seriously. And he wanted to be respected. He wanted to be liked by the people of Naples, who did look at him with, you know, some degree of suspicion, you know, because they're Italian and he's French, and who made him king? But at any rate, Charles VII commissions his engineers to build him a series of palaces on the southern slopes of Mount Vesuvius. And when they dig the foundations of the palace, this is when they rediscover Pompeii. This is when they rediscover Herculaneum. And as they rediscover these ancient cities, they start to pull out this amazing, absolutely breathtaking Roman art starts to come out of these excavations. And Charles VII seizes on this. Charles VII basically has a use for all of these art and artifacts coming out of Pompeii. Charles VII, you see, he wants to be a good king of Naples. Charles VII wants to make Naples, a southern Italian city, the equal of any of the Italian cities of the north. You know, it's northern Italy that we think of when we think of, you know, the artworks of the Renaissance. You know, Leonardo, you know, Michelangelo, all of these Donatello, all the Ninja Turtles, all of these great Renaissance masters come from northern Italy. Southern Italy was kind of viewed as this artistic backwater. But Charles VII sees a way to make Naples famous, to secure his position as the king of this Italian city. He's going to use all of this Roman art to make the art collection of Naples equal to, if not superior to, any art collection of the north. He's going to make Naples the equal of Venice. He's going to make Naples the equal of Milan, of Florence, of Pisa. He's going to show the artistic refinement and sophistication and riches and artistic genius of southern Italy, and he's going to do this in Naples. So what he does is he abandons his idea for this palace on the southern slopes of Vesuvius, and he starts launching these series of pits and tunnels, and you see them right there. These series of tunnels and pits, and the entire point of all of these sort of excavations, they're not very systematic, they're not very well organized, because Charles VII doesn't really care about knowledge about the past. What he wants is the artistic stuff. The sole purpose of these excavations is to recover antiquities to reflect the sophistication and the pride of the Bourbon kingdom of Naples. And in this, he is spectacularly successful. And in doing this, in excavating Pompeii in an attempt to just recover its art and treasures, in this way, Pompeii nicely illustrates the original point of archaeology. It wasn't to sort of study the archaeological record to produce knowledge about the human past. The original point of archaeology was the recovery of cool stuff. The point of this early archaeology, especially in the 19th century, was the recovery of antiquities, a practice called Antiquarianism. It's important because it's in all caps, and we're going to return to this concept of antiquarianism when we actually address the historical development of archaeological science itself. And there's the museum he built right above my yellow box. That's the Naples National Archaeology Museum, which today houses the world's finest collection of Roman art and sculpture in the world. If you study Roman art, if you're interested in Roman art, you are going to spend a lot of time looking at the collections of the Naples National Archaeological Museum. And pretty much if you've ever opened a book about Roman art, virtually something like 70–80% of all of our great surviving works of Roman art all come from these excavations at Pompeii. If you see on the left, that's a fresco. That's the fresco of, we actually know that guy's name. It's Terentius Neo. He was a baker at Pompeii, and it's a portrait of him and his wife. And it was found in their home. And the excavators at Naples very carefully cut this off the wall. They removed it and house it in that museum right up above me. And if you're into Roman art and if you're into world history, you've probably seen this picture. This is the very famous mosaic of the Battle of Gaugamela, between Alexander the Great and the Persian Emperor Darius. And there's the cowardly Persian Emperor, and there's Alexander the Great on the left. And this is very interesting because this is actually a Roman mosaic. It's a piece of Roman artwork, but it depicts a narrative from Greek history. And this is something else we're going to encounter when we start talking about the art of Pompeii. The art of Pompeii is very cosmopolitan. It reflects a wide variety of artistic traditions and cultural aesthetics. And this is fantastic art, absolutely fantastic art. There's, you see, the dancing figures right up above me, these dancing naked lithe figures. Those are 3 boys, by the way. There we have a scene from Roman life of a family enjoying a repast. There's the mother and her son. They're having a Roman meal. There's this beautiful bronze and golden armband. It goes around the upper arm. It's a piece of it's an incredible piece of art. And it has an inscription on the interior in Latin. In Latin, it reads, "To my favorite slave girl. Love in ancient Rome." Now, the artifacts and art of Pompeii is, again, very cosmopolitan. It's not just, the mosaic about the Battle of Gaugamela. There you see on the left, that's a bronze statue from something called the House of the Faun. And that's a figure from Greek mythology. Right there, that's a Roman-style image of an Egyptian goddess. That's Isis. You can tell it's Isis because she's holding an ankh in her left hand. Right up above me is another bronze sculpture. That's a Mesopotamian lion. The art and artwork of Pompeii is very cosmopolitan. They're into Egyptian figures. They're into Greek history. They're into Mesopotamian art. They're into Greek mythology. They really like artwork that shows these cultural aesthetics from across the breadth of the Roman Empire. And there's scenes from everyday life. There's the mosaic right up above me of a tomcat killing someone's chicken. Here's gold bracelets, ivory hairpins. And the thing about the artwork of Pompeii is that it's found everywhere. The ancient Romans of Pompeii lived in a world that was surrounded by this beautiful art. Even that baker, Terentius Neo, that we saw earlier, he was just a baker's assistant. I mean, he was not anybody special. He wasn't a general. He wasn't a mayor. He wasn't a senator. He was just a baker. In fact, I think he was a baker's assistant. Yet he could afford to have the walls of his house painted with these beautiful frescoes. And, you see those artifacts on the left. Ivory hairpins, gold bracelets. These were found not in, the houses of the powerful and the elite. These were found, among the possessions of everyday Roman citizens. The everyday Roman citizen of Pompeii, from baker's assistants to, mule drivers, these people lived really well. Material wealth was very widely distributed in Roman society at Pompeii. And one of the more interesting things that emerged from the archaeology of Pompeii was the graffiti of Pompeii. And in fact, we're going to do a tiny little research question. We're going to do a tiny little research question using only the graffiti of Pompeii. This is actually what the graffiti of Pompeii actually looks like. What they would do is cover the outside of their houses in basically layers of plaster. And so the Romans didn't put graffiti, with a can of spray paint. They would just be bored, leaning up against a wall, and then simply pull out a sharp piece of metal or a knife, and they could start immediately scratching whatever they wanted on the walls of the structures around them. And they did this constantly. There on the upper left is what the graffiti looks like when you see it in person. There on the lower left is a copy, a drawing of what actually the graffiti looks like. And I want you to look at the basic penmanship that's being used there. Note the straightness of the lines, the regularity of the characters, the legibility of the text itself. The person who wrote that writes on a regular basis. The person who wrote that graffiti, who scratched it into a wall, 2,000 years ago, that person was literate and used their literacy on a regular basis. And they wrote these things into the wall. And here's some other graffiti right up above me. There's a local politician. They're making fun of him. They say he has a big nose. There's somebody that scratched a maze into a wall and in fact wrote the labyrinth right up above it. And look there on the upper right. P.S. loves C.E. They scratched a little heart and their initials on the side of this Roman building sometime before the year AD 79. Now, immediately what you should be asking is, well, okay, Keith, here is, the graffiti itself, but what is the actual content? What are they actually writing on the walls of this Roman city? And before we get to that, I again want to ask you a tiny little research question. And that's the research question right at the top, right up there. The graffiti of Pompeii as an indicator of Roman literacy. What does the graffiti of Pompeii tell us about the literacy in the Roman Empire, specifically in terms of class and gender? So I'm going to show you a lot of the graffiti of Pompeii, and I want you to ask yourself, what's the occupation of the people who are writing the graffiti? Are these generals? Are these senators? Is this the elite of society? Or are these the everyday citizens, the low-born people, regular urban citizens of Pompeii itself? So pay attention to what jobs are mentioned and what kind of jobs are being discussed in the graffiti of Pompeii. And secondly, gender. I want you to notice who is actually writing this graffiti. Is it men or is it women? Now we can actually tell this because in Latin, names are highly gendered in Roman culture. Basically, male names will end in an IAN or an IUM. Female names will generally end in a vowel, either an A. Like you have Romulus would be the male name, Romula would be the female name. So just by the name itself, you can kind of tell who is writing it. And is the people writing the graffiti, are they mostly men? Are they entirely men? Are they mostly female? Are they entirely women? Or is it an even mix? And let's move to the graffiti itself. There is a sample of the graffiti of Pompeii. I am not going to read these to you. What I want you to do is to read these passages on your own. Pause the video or maybe go over this section a few times and just kind of take a moment, read the graffiti of Pompeii and come up with an idea, build a hypothesis. What was the state of Roman literacy in the 1st century AD, especially in terms of class and gender. And I'm just going to sit here while you read and drink my energy drink. Not bad. Not good. Got it? Good. What is your hypothesis? Is your hypothesis that these are almost entirely men writing and that these men are very elite? Is it that it's entirely men writing and the men are mostly low-born? Is it an even mix of men and women? Is it mostly men with a few women? Is it mostly women with a few men? Is it almost entirely women? Is it almost entirely elite women or low-born women? Or is it a complete mix of gender and a complete mix of class? Because now we're going to test your hypothesis against portraiture, the preserved portraits from the explosion from the buried city of Pompeii. What do we have here? We have portraits. These are portraits that were painted in people's houses. They would commission a painter, they would coat their wall in fresh plaster, and while the plaster was still wet, the painter would come in and paint portraits of the people who lived in the houses. We've met Terentius Neo. He's a baker. It's him and his wife. Now, these are portraits. These are not photographs. And the point is that when your portrait is being painted, you basically tell the painter what aspects of your life you want them to emphasize. Were these people, did they have the painter paint them like, as warriors? Did he have them paint them as everyday Joes? Did he have them paint them as dressed up in their finery? And this is how a lot of these portraits were painted. Look at the portrait of Terentius Neo and his wife. Terentius Neo is holding a rolled scroll and holding it under his chin. His wife is holding a book, a wax tablet, and holding the stylus to her chin. Look at the portrait right up above me of this Roman woman. And what is being emphasized in her portrait? She is again holding a writing tablet and holding a stylus to her mouth. And she's, of course, emphasizing the fact that she has this really nice hair. But basically, one of the things being emphasized in these wall portraits at Pompeii is the everyday citizens of Pompeii are emphasizing their own literacy. Literacy was highly valued in the Roman Empire. And not just any literacy, female literacy. Highly, highly valued in the Roman Empire. Now, we've solved one little mystery about the ancient Roman Empire based on the archaeological evidence from Pompeii. We're going to move on to our next section of Pompeii when we get into actually what was found there itself. And when we get to buried Pompeii, I will meet you there.